World Leaders, Past and Present Series Overview. So, first of all, this is part of my scripted book review series. A scripted book review series is the name I gave to this project I'm doing where I'm going through the old book reviews I wrote years ago on my blog and then just making a YouTube version of them for whatever it's worth. As I'm working through these book reviews now, I've come up to the point where I read I read 7 books in the World Leaders Past and Present book series. So I figured rather than spend the beginning of each separate review, talking about this series, I just do one video giving kind of a general overview of the series, why I was reading it, and then in each subsequent video I just link back to this one in the description and not waste any more time talking about it. So this is kind of an odd series. It's a series of books that seem to be aimed at young adults. Why did I read them? I read them because at the time I was stuck out in Oita Prefecture in rural Japan. Kind of in the middle of nowhere. And English books were hard to find. So I was at the Oita Prefectural Library. This English selection was so limited. And being a history nerd, I wanted to get some history books to read in my spare time. And because it was a library, you don't have to pay for anything, you just check them out. And so I checked these books out. It's an interesting series. First of all, talking about maybe the format of each book. Each book looks like a children's book. You know, those kind of rectangle or square children's books. Like this, actually. This is not actually one of the books in the series. This is a different children's book. But just for reference, maybe this general shape, the hard cardboard cover, the glossy paper inside, that format is how these books all look, which of course screams out that these books are written for, 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, whatever. Like you'd never see a businessman in a coffee shop reading a book like that, right? And yet, when you get into them, the prose in these books it doesn't seem to be pitched at young adults. It seems to be pitched like more at adults. I can quote an example from this maybe. This is from each book in the series is on a different world leader. This one is from the book on Robespierre. It's talking about right at the beginning of the Reign of Terror. I'll read out the quote. Notice, first of all, how many names are crammed into this one paragraph, which seems like a lot to ask like a 10-year-old kid to keep track of. But also notice how much information is in here. It's very information dense. Okay. Quote, believing he had been ill-treated by the Jacobins, Herbert presented himself to Paris as the new guardian against corruption. His sweeping program called for cracking down on suspects, trying the Queen, and ridding the military of aristocrats. Followers of both Herbert and Danton wanted the Committee of Public Safety to take on more tasks and responsibilities. Under this pressure, the committee extended its control over the state. Danton, having resisted anything more to do with the committee, although he urged it to expand its work. Couthon, Chachelles, and Saint-Just were frequently away from Paris on various assignments, and their absence left Robespierre to become the vital link between the National Convention and the busy committee. In September, the committee was joined by the more extremist supporters of the left, Jean-Nicolas Billard Varenne and Jean-Marie Collot de Herbos. The only moderate on the committee was the engineer, Lazare Carnot, who quarreled bitterly with Saint-Just. Okay, apologies for massacring the pronunciation of all those French names. Sorry, I don't speak French. But hopefully you get the point, maybe. It doesn't seem like prose which is going to be aimed at a 10 or 12-year-old. I was looking at the Amazon site for the... I was Googling these books just now and looking at the Amazon site for one of them. And I think they had it pitched as grades 8 to 12. Which is probably a little bit more realistic with that kind of prose. Although it still looks silly looking like a children's book when it's being pitched, because 12th grade, that's like 17, 18, right? Yeah, so there is a little bit of a disconnect between the density of information and the kind of childish format of the books. But yeah, whatever. If you're willing to go along with that, these books can be interesting. You also probably noticed there were a lot of names crammed into that paragraph, and often when reading these books, especially that one on Robespierre, there were so many names to keep track of, I kept having to go back to the index. Often one name would pop up, and then it wouldn't pop up again for another 50 pages. So, yeah. Despite the fact that these books look like they're for children, and I think they are intended for school-age children, 12, 13, 14, and 15, I don't know. There is a lot of information in there, and it can be rough keeping track of the names. Typical book is just over 100 pages in this series. So, like 120 pages, 130 pages. And it's like a children's book, so not this, but imagine like a couple of pictures here, some paragraphs of information down here, maybe a small picture here, and they've got a couple columns here. Sorry, you're gonna have to imagine because I no longer have the books with me. I returned them back to the library 10 years ago. This is, again, one of the old book reviews. The series of books was published in 1987 and 1988, and I think may have gone on even longer, although Oita Prefecture only had them through 1988. It was a series of 157 biographies, which is an odd number. I mean, why 157? Possibly that could be because Oita Prefectural Library only has through 1988. I think maybe there were more that came out after that. The beginning of each book is a 5-page essay on leadership by Arthur M. Schlesinger Jr. You may remember that. That was, well, among other things, he's probably most famous for being the official Kennedy historian. But it does, yeah, it's an interesting essay, but it's a little bit strange that it's the same 5 pages in every book. Because it's like a whole series of books on world leaders, right? Each one of them, the first 5 pages are exactly the same. I mean, it makes sense if there's only one of these books, but the books just seem like they're meant to be part of like a school library. Like they don't seem like somebody would buy just one of them. It seems like they're meant to be stacked on library shelves in like a middle school or something like that. So in that respect, it does seem like a bit of a waste of paper to have the same 5-page essay at the beginning of every book. In this essay, the thesis of this series is set forward. Arthur M. Schlesinger Jr. argues against the idea of historical determinism. And he argues that individual actions, not historical determinism, shapes the course of history, and that leaders are necessary for society. He actually references War and Peace in that essay. And at the time I read this, I hadn't yet read War and Peace. Since then, I have actually read War and Peace, so now I understand a little bit better what he's talking about. But Tolstoy spends, War and Peace, Tolstoy goes on about a 100-page digression, articulating his view of history. And his view of history is that world leaders don't make a difference. So, you know, whether or not Robespierre would have been around, the French Revolution would have still happened anyways. Actually, that's a bad example because Robespierre didn't come in until the tail end of the French Revolution anyways. But, you know, whether or not George Washington had been around or not, America would have still gotten independence. Tolstoy's specific example, he said, even if Napoleon hadn't existed, France and Russia would still have gone to war. He says, you know, at a certain point, there's just kind of a wave of change that's ready to kind of surge through history. And this wave kind of throws up leaders. So it's not like leaders make history. It's like the popular movements create the leaders, and the leaders are just reacting to these kind of surges in the population, or surges in history. I'm probably not doing a good job of articulating that. Maybe read Tolstoy's book to see his full argument. Anyways, Arthur M. Schlesinger mentions Tolstoy by name and says, this is the view of history I do not support. The point of this series is to argue that great men do make a difference. So, you know, the fact that if Winston Churchill hadn't been alive, and in fact this is the exact same example he uses. He uses the example of Winston Churchill. I think there was an incident when Winston Churchill almost got run over in his younger days. And he said, you know, had that happened, had Winston Churchill gotten run over by that car, history would have been different. You can't say that the leaders don't matter. When I read this, I thought, yeah, of course. People make history, the personality of the leaders matter. Since reading Tolstoy's argument, I'm almost kind of half persuaded by Tolstoy. I don't know, I'm on the fence, kind of half and half. Schlesinger in the same essay is arguing that leaders are good, like that we need leaders. And that, well, that conflicts a little bit with my political leanings towards kind of decentralized socialism or at the anarchist wing of the socialist movement. So I think I would probably disagree with that, but I won't get into all that now. The Oita Prefectural Library did not have all 157 of these books. I wish they had though, because when you open the book up, like if you open it up, they've got a list on the inside cover of all the different books in the series. And there are some fascinating people in this series. Like whoever was in charge of selecting these world leaders did a great job of selecting. Like it's not the obvious ones. I mean, it's the obvious ones as well. You know, your George Washingtons, your Abraham Lincolns, your Franklin, your Franklin Delano Roosevelts, John F. Kennedys. But it's also a whole bunch of just really interesting personalities from all over the world. People like Sun Yat-sen, Robert Mugabe, Che Guevara, Garibaldi, Leon Blum, Willy Brandt, Oliver Cromwell, Lech Walesa, Lech Walesa, the Solidarity guy from Poland, Leon Trotsky, Pericles from ancient Greece, Daniel Ortega, Emiliano Zapata, Chou Enlai, Lafayette, Anwar Sadat, Golda Meir, Yasser Arafat. I mean, some really fascinating names there. Unfortunately, not all of them were in Oita Prefectural Library, but I took out 7. I found there were more books, but these were the 7 that most fascinated me. I got Robespierre, Danton, Napoleon, Thomas Paine, Clemenceau, Queen Victoria, and Lenin. And so those are the 7 books that I'll be reviewing as I go through this series. Yeah, there's an odd thing with these books. They just have like one name. So instead of Thomas Paine, they just say Paine. I think that's fair enough with some of them. Like for Napoleon, like Napoleon is obviously just named by Napoleon. I mean Lenin as well. Thomas Paine though, Thomas Paine is really known by Thomas Paine, right? So if you just say the Paine, I don't know. But that's what that book is called. It's just called Paine. Each of these books is written by a different author. And interestingly enough, at least in the books I checked out, not one single one of them is a trained historian. For example, the book on Lenin was written by someone with an honors degree in the classics who plays in a musical ensemble. That's what they put in the About the Author section. The book on Robespierre was written by a presidential speechwriter. The book on Queen Victoria, they simply describe the author as a mother of three. So, yeah, stay-at-home mom, I guess. Yeah. Nonetheless, despite the fact that none of the people writing these books are historians, I've generally found them to be quite interesting. And again, although the target audience is, I don't know who the target audience is, but these are meant to be displayed in school libraries for, I guess, secondary school age kids. I learned a ton from them. And you know, at 100 pages, a little bit over 100 pages, it is enough to get into some detail about the various historical figures they're profiling. So, yeah, that's the series. I guess the next review will be on the first book I read in the series, the one on Robespierre, and then I'll come back with the rest of them in due course.